All right. Morning, everyone. Just as a reminder, I am recording this meeting number 4 here. Any housekeeping before we jump into the vision statement? Yes, Pearl.
Morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
I was hoping we could talk a little bit about process at the start of the call. I'll say that we were pretty challenged with the timing of some of the comments, and I wanted to make sure that you knew going in that we will have a challenge responding to some of the comments, not for lack of wanting to, but it's pretty tough for us to be able to read comments within less than a business day and to be able to respond. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about process and making sure that comments are all coming in at the same time, or that we've got something around that to make sure that we can all participate fully with the same sets of information.
No, I understand your concern completely, and obviously parties will have a chance to respond to comments. So it just will slow down the process. Not that we are going at light speed, but and I think what Pearl's responding to is there were a couple comments that were at least filed not timely in response to my email last week or 2 weeks ago, where I'd indicated that parties should submit anything that they wanted to discuss in block 1 or the vision statements on the 12th, and then file comments in response to those comments on the 12th on the 17th. So if parties could make a more diligent effort to timely file comments so that folks can respond, and that we can have a better discussion at the work group, that will be beneficial, because these comments that come in late, parties don't have a chance to run them through the chain, digest them, and we're going to be left with rehashing things. So it just slows down the process. So does anybody have any questions on that? Yes, Eli.
Hey, thanks, Judge McLean. Good morning. Yes, I was a little bit confused by the process, I will admit as well. My understanding when leaving the meeting exactly 2 weeks ago is that we were going to be provided the presentations from the utilities, I think very shortly thereafter the meeting. And I didn't see the presentation come through until last Friday. So that would be the 13th. We tried to turn around comments as quickly as possible on behalf of OPC, but it did take us from reviewing the presentations Friday to getting those out on Wednesday, admittedly, to get those out. So agreed, there was at least confusion on process from our end. I had interpreted the last meeting as the utilities would be quickly providing those presentations, I think, very shortly thereafter the meeting, and we'd be able to present or respond to those much more quickly. And so if that can be enabled going forward, I certainly think that's possible, but that's how I had understood the commitment leaving the last meeting.
All right, understood. So let's just, if people have questions about process, please either ask during the meeting, or send me an email after I send out follow-up email following today or any future meetings. Does that help you, Pearl, at all?
I think it does. Just to confirm, Your Honor, would it be helpful for us to, I'm looking for the time that you'd like us to put in some reply comments, just to create that record that I know you're after in response.
Sure. Well, I mean, I would propose that we keep the same, I'm not as concerned about setting a time limit for your reply comments to today. Why don't we talk about that at the end of the meeting today, Pearl, if you could just remind me. But I still, obviously we're not going to be able to come to any kind of conclusion on block 1 today, but I still would like to move forward in getting parties to weigh in on block 2, just so we can have at least the appearance of some progress. And I'll be asking for those comments on block 2 and potentially other issues on Thursday the 2nd. And that's anybody who wants to comment initially. So, parties don't have to wait for the utilities to respond. If they've got ideas for whatever we should cover in block 2, that's the time to do it. And then I ask for comments in response to any comments filed on the 7th, so that parties will have at least an opportunity to be prepared to discuss those comments on our next meeting. Is that kind of clear, Pearl? All right. All right. Anything else before we get going? All right. Let's see if we can accomplish something today and do this vision statement. All right. Let's. If I can figure out how to. All right. All right. Share my screen there. Wrong button. All right. Just bear with me. I have to figure out how to share my screen. Why is this not coming up? Window. There we go. All right. Can everybody see that now?
Yes.
Anyone?
Yep.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. Now I can't see hands raised, so if you want to speak, just go ahead and jump in. So I took what we had last week and threw in the proposed amendments by the joint utilities, and then staff provided 2 versions. I'm not sure why the second one isn't showing up. Oh, there it is. Any reactions to these?
Yeah, this is Paul Verchinsky, and I think we need a decision point here. You're putting in shall in this vision statement. That's going to automatically draw in all the lawyers on the utility side, because this then is going to become a regulation. I think we need to talk about that. I mean, I deliberately steered away from that, knowing what was going to happen as the knock-on effect here in developing a vision statement. Now, I could be totally wrong. I mean, if the goal here is to provide a regulatory basis for the commissioners, then that's the way to go. However, if we're trying to put a plan in place that then will be subject to the regulatory process, that's a whole different breed of cat, so to speak. So which is it, folks?
Well, I'm fine taking out shall. I thought when I initially drafted it, I got some pushback saying, the shalls and the musts and the everything that's mandatory had to be in there. But I'm fine with taking it out. I mean, ultimately, this is going to be subject to some kind of regulations, once we conclude this work group.
Well, that information is good to know, because I would try to steer clear of putting shells in. I mean,
Right.
it's at least from my standpoint. I don't know
Sure.
how everybody else feels, but
Sure.
that's where I'm coming from.
Sure. And just to clue everybody in, we've got to have regulations in place by July 1 of 25. So my thought, at least generally in the process, is once we submit the final report to the commission in April, they'll come out with some kind of an order, and then we'll all get back together and try and draft some regulations, which will be a fun process as well. Yes, ma'am. Pearl?
I thought maybe I could sneak for a second.
No, please.
I wanted to just briefly, Paul, give you a quick response, which is that I don't think from the utilities perspective, we see this vision statement going into COMAR directly. Obviously, if it did, then we would have then our legal teams would be involved. I think we're very much treating that as the spirit that I think you brought it forward, which was, what is the objective of this working group? What are we trying to do? What is the longer term vision for the utilities? If it's not going into Comar, I don't see our lawyers getting very involved on the shalls and wills, though if we have counsel on the phone and they'd like to contradict me, I am always happy to be wrong on this.
Yeah, yes, sir, David. David?
I'm sorry. I don't want to engage in the shalls and the wills. I just had a question about the use of the word optimize. If you use optimize, you have to have some optimization criteria. And unfortunately, I'm saying I'm concerned about that, but I don't have a better word for it. Maximize is probably not the right one either. But under the same vein of this is aspirational as opposed to operational, optimize is an okay word if it's just being aspirational. So, but again, if it makes it into regulation, someone's going to have to identify the criteria for optimize.
Right. Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I think, yeah, whether or not whatever we agree to, hopefully today, we'll make it into regs. I mean, we won't know that until, down the road. But when we're talking about shalls and wills, and then we've got some striving. I think aspirational is a good term to describe it, at least in my mind. I don't think either the commission or parties are going to come back and say, "Oh, look, Pepco, you agreed to this vision, and there's a shall in there, and you didn't do it, so you should get dinged for X, Y, and Z." Jorge.
Good morning. Really quick, maybe we're still talking about the first proposal, the utilities proposed.
We can talk about either one, sir.
Oh, beautiful. So if you can go a little bit, can we go up, because the staff version doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, let me. Gosh, of course. All right, let me. Yeah, just bear with me. Damn it. All right, how do I get rid of everybody here?
What you're doing, that a quick comment. Integrated distribution planning, the DOE, the acronym used by DOE is IDP. That's on the as a side note. But then one of the things, and I think I'm going to piggyback. Okay, fantastic. Okay.
All right, good. All right,
yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Sorry, now I can't see anybody, so just speak up.
So yeah, so they issue the acronym, and then I'm going to piggyback on the last comment. Optimizing, maximizing. I think truly what we're looking here is for the utility to earnestly integrate the capabilities of DER into their planning and operations. So you could say optimize the use of DER. That could mean that somebody in their house optimizes the DER to their advantage, to their benefit. But truly what we're looking is how it is that this DER can contribute to the grid as a whole. And in order to do that, the utility will have to deem this DER to be, first of all, trustworthy and firm enough for them to take it into account into their planning and operations. So I will open to the group to use terms such as integrating into into grid operations or into the planning phase the capabilities of DER and NWS, instead of saying optimizing and maximizing.
Okay. Jorge, do you have a preference for any of the versions that are up there?
I will say the second one, the second staff version, looks very well. Just, make IDP instead of IDSP to be consistent with DOE.
Oh, yeah, I'm not worried about that right now. But
and then instead of optimizing, to actually integrating the capabilities of DER into the grid planning and operations.
Okay. All right.
Good morning, Judge McLean. Hi, it's Al Bartlett. I just wanted just a clarification when I did raise the question in the last meeting about the shalls versus the wills and whatever, but it was not insisting on the shalls. It was rather that there was in the original draft an asymmetry between shall essentially maintain the status quo and strive to modernize. And that asymmetry was what really, I mean,
Okay.
I'm happy if it's wills.
Okay. All right.
Let me just throw out 3 things real fast. Really like, happy to, with Jorge's idea to say IDS or DSP will integrate the use of distributed energy resources. Sounds good. We're happy with dropping shall, moving away from shall. Don't like the use of integrated just because ID integrated is a term of art in the utility industry, and it refers to a very specific set of utilities, and they generally are not deregulated. And I would just like to avoid that so we don't create confusion with other types of proceedings that go on in this country. So avoiding integrated, and we do note we did review the RAP advice to the commission. They did a presentation apparently early last year. We're not sure what venue that was presented in, but it seemed to confuse DSP, and there was a lot of mismatch, and we can go deeply into that if we want, but just mostly I would like to keep this, just call it distribution system planning so that we don't confuse in transmission, wholesale markets, generation. Make sure we all know that we're talking, anyone who looks at this from the outside knows that we are only talking about distribution system planning in this work group.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ethan. Yeah. Go ahead again. I gotta switch back. Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. And thanks for the comments thus far. I think I'd push back against the concept of not using the word integrated because it's used in other contexts. I think the idea, and this is something that Jorge was starting to speak to, is one of the main goals that we're trying to make happen here is for DERs to be integrated into DSP. And I think that's the key piece that needs to fall within this vision statement. I think that understanding how the term integration can be used in other contexts in the industry, but nonetheless, I think it's important to highlight that integrating DERs into the planning process, planning for export as opposed to using one-off interconnection processes to plan for export, that's part of what this work group should aim to achieve, and it's part of what's discussed in detail in the JADE map. And therefore, I would recommend that we highlight the integration of DER. If there's a different synonym for integration, I think that's fine. But I do think integrating DER into the planning process is a key objective of this work group.
How about incorporate?
Eli, hey, and I was actually okay with saying integrate DERs as opposed to optimize. But if you want to go with, I like that even better.
Which one? Integrate or incorporate?
Incorporate.
All right. Why don't we try doing this? Incorporate. All right. So we'll get rid of that. All right. All right. And I'm just working off that first one here that the utilities marked up. Shall. Why don't we do it like this? Get rid of this.
And I'll also just add, I'm not anti optimize or maximize. I do think those could play a strong role because I do think optimizing the performance of DERs and ensuring that they are indeed optimized to manage grid related constraints as much as they can provide those benefits. That is something worth calling out. It's hard to react at this exact second where that word might fall into here, but I do think the concept of optimization of DERs is also a reasonable one to include.
Okay. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I think once you say optimize, you have to say, are you optimizing for cost? Are you optimizing for grid reliability? Are you optimizing for resilience? If that's why I was bringing up the issue on optimize. That's all.
Okay.
And this is Jorge, and I wanna follow up a little bit on Ethan. So Ethan, will you be, and this is in the context within the DOE modernization studies of their integrated distribution planning framework. Will you be opposed to follow that approach that the DOE has laid out?
I would have to read it first. Not really sure what they've said. I've read a few different, distribution system plans. This is Maryland, and we're going to need to tailor this to Maryland utilities. I just don't want to create confusion with proceedings in other parts of the country, specifically southern states, which I think you're familiar with.
Yeah,
So,
if I can piggyback on Ethan, I think what we're saying is let's just write down what we say rather than using proper nouns from other contexts that may be applied differently in other places. If we're talking about integrating DER, let's say, or incorporating, I'll say I've got no dog in that fight. Whatever verb makes folks happy, good with.
right, and just to provide the reference, this is the modern distribution grid study that they did at the District of Columbia. They used 5 different jurisdictions, and the District of Columbia was one of those jurisdictions. Maryland was not, but I think that the staff used the term IDP, and it's a very well laid out framework. I just want to put it out there.
Are we getting too much into the weeds here? I think the vision statement's kind of general. I think we're getting held up on some bigger things.
I agree. We should stick to the 40,000 foot level.
All right. Okay. Yeah, we'll dive into the details, into the regulations ultimately. All right. Staff, you guys are awful quiet. You guys have 2 versions. Which one do you like better, and why do you think it's better than what we have so far?
DeAndre Wilson here on behalf of staff. Well, in regards to the word optimization or optimize, the intent is that I think it represents how important the commission feels that utilizing DERs is to the distribution system planning process. And optimization can mean different things to different utilities based on where they are in the process and their capabilities. So we think the word is rather flexible in that sense, but as we can see or evidenced in the other work groups, such as the electric vehicle work group, the energy storage work group, and other work groups, they have defined what that optimization is. They have set benefit cost and other types of measures in which the value of these different DERs are measured. So optimization, I think, has been set in that regard and will continue to be set in that regard based on the things that will be the products that will come out of those work groups. So when we said optimization, that's pretty much what we were trying to get to, is that whatever that looks like to each utility, it's to its optimum. But we don't have any. We don't have any comment on the shall statements. That's perfectly fine. Whether we can change that to will, I don't think that holds much weight. But we don't have we offered these 2 just in a matter of wording. I don't think they differ that much from each other. DSP, IDSP, we can change that to whatever we feel is works for the work group. But we would probably go with the one that's closest to what you originally presented, just to And that would probably be the second one. But other than that, we don't really have a preference for either.
Okay. All right. So staff likes version 2. OPC likes that one as well.
I think OPC would like to take another look at this perhaps after the meeting. If it would be possible for us to maybe, I don't know if we can align on one of these overarching frameworks and then provide comments on one of the specific vision statements as opposed to all of the vision statements. That might be a preferable approach, but we can nonetheless provide comments on all of them if that's preferred.
I'm just trying to get some progress going here. I understand if people have to make comments because, again, staff's comments were filed a little bit late. All right. All right. So why don't we get rid of that one since staff support? I get what, you know what? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to point out modernization or modernized grid. We wanted to put that in the vision statement, and I see that it's been captured in the second one, so that's fine. But basically, we want to make sure that modernizing the grid continues to be a process that the utilities exercise, because that is going to be necessary in order to garner the level of distributed energy resources that we want to proliferate, we're trying to bring into the electric grid. So modernization or modernize is definitely something that we want to keep in that vision statement.
All right. All right. Anybody else want to be heard on this? Sounds like at least we're down to 2 out of 3 versions. All right. Well, put this.
Which version have we landed on then?
Well, I don't think we have. We
Okay.
got staff likes its second version. I know Jorge expressed some support for that. It seems like there might be a few more parties that are fans of the amendments that have been made to the initial one up top. Yeah, Brandon.
Thank you, Judge McLean. Yeah, I share the viewpoint that I think I worry about us getting stuck spinning our wheels here.
I think we already are.
Yeah. I personally, it seems like there's a consensus growing around staff version 2. I personally like that one the most. I think it is the most appropriate. It keeps things, we want a modernized grid. We want to work on optimization. We want to meet the state requirements. So I personally prefer staff version 2, but honestly, if we go with either one is fine to me, but I think staff version 2 captures everything that at least most of us on this call are looking to see. So
okay,
that's my final thoughts on it.
All right, appreciate it. Somebody had their hands up. All right. All right. Anybody else? Last time, yeah. Okay. All right. So why don't we just add this to your to-do list for our next meeting? Again, we'll kick off with this. Actually, we won't, but I've got one thing to announce before that. So please take a look at these 2 versions. Maybe we can marry them up into one. Maybe I'll try and take a stab at doing that. But we will revisit the vision statement again. All right. And before next meeting, I wanted to let everyone know that Dan Hurley is going to be presenting on what his Empower Work Group Maryland, his Empower Maryland Work Group, is doing and how we might incorporate that into our process. It looks like some of what Empower Maryland does may fit nicely into Block 3. So if he can give us his what they've got going on in advance of filing comments, that should be helpful. And before the 11/16 meeting, we're going to have John Borkowski. He's going to speak on the electrification work group and the energy storage work group. Maybe not as timely, but it'll still help the discussion. And I'm trying to get Ben Baker and Fred Kelly to present on electric vehicles and the 100% RPS study work group. So I just wanted to let you know I'm working on that. Let's see, somebody posting the comments. All right. So let's go on to the comments. I'm not sure if it would be. I think it might be more beneficial to go through each point in the block rather than have each party present their specific comments, because we're just going to end up rehashing everything. Does that sound like a decent approach? All right. Pearl is the only one with her camera on, and she is nodding. So I appreciate that, Pearl. All right. So time horizons. Seems like the utilities all kind of do it a little bit differently. Yes, David.
Yeah, the only thing is the Sierra Club comments only focused on the bigger picture.
Sure.
What are the the basic assumptions in terms of what is going to be in place as far as laws and regulations. And I think that's an important bedrock we have to all agree upon, that all the DSPs that will come out of the various utilities need to be aligned with those goals. And I understand the various blocks of various parts of block one we're going to dig into. I just wanted to make sure we had agreement that the DSPs that we're striving for will all meet, and let's assume that these policies and these requirements are embedded in them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Any comments to Sierra Club?
We very much concur.
Okay.
Incorporating the 12 is one of the bedrock goals of this work group, and we are fully supportive.
Good. And I think everyone's on the same page with that. All right. Okay, so time horizons. Ethan, I'll pick on you just because you're with Exelon. What are the odds of everybody getting on the same page, at least with Exelon, in terms of your planning?
Oh, yes. Picked on. Okay. Well, first off, let me just say, I want to kind of ground the group. I've seen a lot of the comments looking for, this time horizon, that time horizon. And, we're the EU utilities. We're DPL Maryland, PEPCO Maryland. And notice that both of those, I say Maryland because they are split between two jurisdictions. And then BG&E, we're the big 800-pound gorilla in the room. But we are not, even among us, the same. And we have other utilities, First Energy, Potomac Edison, SMECO at the table, who are very diverse from us. And we've learned a lot about that through the course of the electrification study work group, where we really had to sit down and compare notes about how we do things to understand how electrification impacts would be distributed among us. So, I want to emphasize to the group that a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to this DSP is not going to work very well, and is going to conflict directly with the Commission's directive regarding creating too much change for utilities that would be then felt by ratepayers. We need to make sure to understand that each utility is in its own place technologically, has its own stakeholders, its own territories, that our demographics are very different. And so we need to build a process that is allowed to be tailored to each utility's needs. And I'm speaking on behalf of other utilities right now, and I probably shouldn't be. So I really encourage the other utilities, especially to speak up now, because acknowledging and respecting the diversity of the utilities, and that we are all going to be on a journey with this DSP process, and they're going to be very different journeys, I think is vital to making a process that works for Maryland.
All right. Thank you, sir. I figured your answer would be something along those lines, and I understand. So, do you have any initial wag on the proposal for a 20-year long-term forecast, Ethan?
20 would be more than we are currently scoped to do. We
Right.
are scoped for 15, but we are probably the outlier in among utilities.
Agreed.
And so, I think we just need to make sure to understand that, if we're going to talk about 20 years, we need to talk about goals and long-term goals rather than this needs to be implemented in the next decade. The IT and software needs to do that kind of a long-term analysis are expensive and will be borne by our ratepayers.
Right. I think Mr. Verchinsky had suggested the 20-year outlook based on the Climate Solutions Now Act, which had a 2045 date in there, I believe.
Yes, it is out to 2045.
Right, sure.
And, I think looking out towards periods before that will still get us there. You may navigate to London or you may navigate to England from here, but you do it in steps along the way. And, you have to adjust your course as you go. So smaller scales allow us to, and yeah, I'm going out too far is just going to be, I think, difficult for a lot of utilities and expensive. And so let's think more aspirationally.
Okay, sure.
Eric is going to correct me.
Good morning, everyone. And it's not a correction, Ethan, right? It's just building on what you shared. So just to share, I work with a team that does the capacity planning for BGE, and pardon me not being on camera at this present time. When we think about 15 versus 20 years, right? There's so much more that hasn't been ironed out as yet, whether it's at the legislative level, the regulatory level, all the things that needs to happen to help the state of Maryland reach their mandate. I was informed by one of the MDE representatives that it's a mandate and not a target or goal, right? So we believe that there's so many things that needs to fall in place, that trying to push all the way out to 20 years, you won't see much difference in a forecast in the latter 5 years. And that is one of the concerns we have, right? But as things continue to flush out and get aligned, both on the regulatory and the legislative side, right, that those forecasts will shore up some more. So we, from a risk adverse perspective, looking at 15 years for the BG team.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Bartlett.
Yes, sorry, let me get off mute. Thank you, Judge. So I think the point about the diversity among utilities and how they work and how they plan is important. And so one thing that I would suggest is that maybe we rethink who we are a little bit and put ourselves all on the same team, so that we're actually all looking for the same goals, which operationally I would take to mean that each utility should, in its own way, specify in its planning how it is going to meet some of the specific goals that have been set. For example, in the context of the Legislative Solar Incentives Working Group that's going on right now, I believe MEA has calculated that we need 130,000 homes to have gone solar to meet the 14.5% 2030 target. So BGE share of that, for example, might be whatever it is, 60% of those homes, whatever it is. So it'd be great for BG to include in their planning a commitment to be part of the state team that's working to have that their share of that 130,000 homes having operational solar by 2030. And there are other goals that are specified in different places, as David Kethen's laid out. That would be useful too. So the individuality of each utility's planning process is really necessary in many ways, but the commitment to essentially, somebody runs, somebody kicks, somebody throws, but we're all playing on the same team. I would really like to see some of these specific goals built into the planning process, wherever they fall within the 15 or 10 or 20-year time frame of each utility.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Yes, Pearl.
Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you all. I really appreciate that recognition of the difference of the utilities. And I think we are all on the same team. I think we're all trying to figure out how do we get to a place where we can incorporate distributed energy resources into these planning processes in an effective way. We're all in the same place where we want to figure out how we can get the transportation electrification effectively built in. None of us on the utility side certainly want to have a customer who comes to us and says, I want to put in my school bus electrified fleet. And we say, we need an additional 5 years to build a new substation. None of us want to be in that situation. So we're all on the same page that we want to get the grid ready. I think that there's a dynamic that's happening where we're sort of talking about two things at the same time. When we're talking about really longer term horizons, we're really talking about conceptual planning. We're not talking about necessarily committing the dollars. We're doing some scenario what if almost planning when we're talking about like that 15 to 20. And what I think I heard in I think I saw written in some of the comments was that there was general consensus that some kind of what if scenario planning needed to be done on a longer time horizon. And that what if might be, what if we all adopt rooftop solar? What if we all adopt community solar? It might be, what if all the fleets electrify first? It might be, what if all the residential cars electrify? But I think I saw in comments that there was a general consensus around some kind of longer term conceptual scenario planning. And I wanted to make sure that I've got that right. And Al, I think that's part of what you were talking about was that how do we think about what the needs are for the system in that longer term to meet the goals? But I don't want to misconstrue what you're saying.
No, Pearl, thanks. That's what I meant.
All right, great. Beth.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
My daughter was on my computer. This is Paul Verchinsky. Sorry about that.
Sorry, sir.
I would agree with what Pearl is saying. You have to know where the ultimate end point is going to be in order to make the steps along the way. And yes, the last 5 years will be more conceptual, but there will be in the interim ways of meeting that, and I think that should be recognized as early on as possible. So, my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, DeAndre.
Yes, I think based on the presentations that the utilities provided in phase one, they've shown the capability. All of them have shown the capability to do a 10-year forecast. Now, based on the cadence in which the commission and other agencies have to respond to the General Assembly with data in regards to the goals set, the clean energy goals or GHG emission reduction goals set by the CSNA, a 5-year cadence and a 10-year cadence, or a 5-year forecast, a 10-year forecast seems to be feasible for all utilities. So I think we can narrow that down. I think we can narrow it down to that. which will provide the commission the opportunity to respond or provide data to the Department of the Environment by 2031 and 2035, where they are required to respond to General Assembly. Anything forecast outside of that, or we talk about a 20-year forecast, which will get us to 2045. Only one, based on what I've reviewed, are currently doing a 20-year long forecast, and that's Semeco. In order for the other utilities to provide something larger or closer to 20, it seems to be, like Pearl said, anything beyond what they're already doing is probably conceptual, or anything longer is conceptual. But that data, how much that's determined by the types of input or input assumptions that you're making, if I'm correct, in regards to, and how accurate that is in order to feel more comfortable about doing a forecast longer or something closer to 20. So, the utilities speaking with each other, getting a better understanding of best practices being used by, say, Semeco that are using the 20-year forecast, that they will be more comfortable with. I think it's more so about the inputs that they put in there that they're using that will get them there, and the analytical tools and methods. So I think that's where the conversation has to be. Now, I understand all utilities aren't the same. What works for one may not work for the other, but I think kind of talking about best practices that are being used amongst each other can better help them be more comfortable with making longer forecasts, such as the 20-year, or getting closer to that. And I would love to hear, I see Pearl has her hand up, so I'd love to hear how the utilities feel about, or I feel about that.
Go ahead, Pearl.
Well, I can't speak for all the utilities, DeAndre, on this one. I was actually going to suggest a process step, which it sounds like there are maybe 3, maybe 4 time horizons that folks are talking about. And DeAndre, you're absolutely right about the level of granularity that we can do at each of those time horizons is different. And the level of granularity that we would go to it's just going to be more conceptually go further out. We're not going to go circuit by circuit. That would take an incredible amount of effort to put together those inputs and put together those studies, but we can do things that are higher level and more appropriate to that time horizon. So from a process perspective, Your Honor, I wanted to see if you'd be open to asking folks to put on the record comments on, I think I heard, folks can certainly add or subtract to this list, time horizons of, I think, sort of short term, which is about 5 years, about 10 years, and about 20 years, and the level of granularity that is appropriate at those different time horizons. That would give us a concrete way to respond to each of those time horizons and what our capabilities are, and sort of the positioning that it sounds like lots of different parties have around those timelines.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think some of the timelines I saw were maybe even short, like there's a short, a mid, and a long term. So yes, David, but I agree that it would help Pearl. David, and then Eli.
Just as a comment, I think some of the concern that was expressed is based on the first time we went through the forecasting, the fact that it appeared that the utilities were not looking at trends in electrification of vehicles and or buildings. And so I think the real issue is the 5-year look is really more an operational look. A 10-year look is looking at somewhat of plans plus trends, and the 20-year look is really looking at trying to include the trends as seen, recognizing that 5 years from now, they may do the study again, in which case the 20 years is now at the 15 years. By the time they've done the second study, it's now at the 10-year point, whatever trends they get a chance to go correct. So I think the real issue is there's an operational phase, there's a trends phase all the way out at the end where the granularity has got to be different, but then the 10-year is trying to get them all together. And that way the PSC reports, the 10-year electrification report that the PSC puts out, will start including these trends and how the utilities think their trends are going to affect their utility area. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Eli.
Yeah, thank you. No, these comments are very helpful, and I just wanted to jump in because we were one of the commenters that also recommended the mid-term planning cycle. We had generally recommended a term of 5 or 6 years to align with the MRP approach, or what we've seen kind of other utilities, some of the Exelon utilities do in other jurisdictions. So we recommended the midterm approach, and I think some of the comments here today speak to the rationale behind that midterm approach, which is that the long-term approach is purposefully intended, at least in large part, to not get into the actual operational planning piece, but more so to understand longer term scenarios. And as such, that's one of the reasons that we're recommending this more midterm planning cycle, because it can also be, a little bit more, I guess, real, I will say, and can actually tie to specific proposed investments. Just given the reflections from a few folks today talking about how the long-term forecasts do not really allow for that, hence the recommendation for a midterm. And then we also generally, and I guess one of the other big pieces of rationale behind this recommendation is because this should allow for a clearer linkage and being able to track progress against long-term goals like those that are in the Climate Solutions Now Act. So rather than looking at less so about looking at the specific investments that are being made 10 years out, but how those investments and how the general approach to planning is aligned or misaligned with long-term goals like those in the CSNA. Thank you.
Hey, Eli, before you go, one question I had, the 5 to 6 year midterm plan you were talking about in your comments, specifically referenced the Exelon utilities, all of which are doing multi-year rate plans. What about for utilities that are not doing those multi-year plans?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think similar to what other commenters have said, we would recommend general utility alignment and uniformity wherever possible. We do acknowledge that in certain situations, utilities, some utilities may not be able to follow along with others in terms of process and procedure. And so I think for those utilities that maybe are not doing MRPs, we would like to understand what opportunities might be on the table for a different planning cycle and time horizon. However, just because those utilities are not necessarily doing MRPs, if enough of the Maryland utilities are, we could nonetheless align midterm planning on the MRP cycle. And it doesn't particularly matter that some of the utilities are not necessarily doing the MRP themselves, but it allows for uniformity across a midterm planning approach. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So in theory, you would still apply the same, I guess, time horizon, the 5 to 6 years.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
We think the same planning horizon could be applied regardless of actually participating in MRP.
All right.
Thanks for that, though.
Thank you. Ethan. We lost him. Ethan, did you have your hand up, sir?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was talking into a muted mic. Yeah, it's one of my tricks. I think 5 years, I'm thinking of this as a series of concentric circles, which I wish I had had time to make a graphic about. But, 3 years is an MRP or an MYP, a multi-year rate plan. 5 years is a budget and forecast for an Exelon company. 10 years is our load forecast. To 15 years now, some of us are moving to that. And so, we would like to keep it longer out term than the 5 years, just because that's like within our current budgeting and subject to a rate case. And we would like to move it out further than that to talk more about trend lines where we see, we're thinking in terms of using this process to be able to report on how state goals are moving, how we see our customers adopting new technologies as we see that being reflected in our AMI, in the data we're bringing in, and then us being able to bring our reactions to it how we are changing our processes, you know, time of use rates, programs that we are proposing, such as, you know, battery storage for residential customers, things like that, that we are moving towards in the longer term. Because once we start bringing it in, it starts becoming conflated with a rate case, conflated into a budget that's already being set. You know, we'd like to keep this more conceptual, and that actually gives the stakeholders, by getting their feedback on this longer term plan, that gives us time to incorporate it without having to change a lot of our financials. And so I would rather look a little bit further out than what Eli is saying, and I appreciate where he's going with this. Just from the point of view of our budgeting and planning, in order to incorporate stakeholder feedback, non-wire solutions, more time is helpful to accommodate that in a way that doesn't cause us to have to change things that are already in flight, resulting in stranded costs, resulting in investments that we aren't going to be able to recover on. And that is to the detriment of our ratepayers. So longer term is preferable.
So probably like a 5, 10, 15, what you have now, Ethan?
Yeah, I would look out further, and, you know, once again, diversity of utilities. Different utilities are going to have different time frames, and I think we need to respect that. I have checked. I don't believe anyone for SMECA is on the line, and I had hoped would have been able to be here to speak to that. But unfortunately, it's just me.
All right. All right. Thank you, sir. Samantha.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Hi, good morning. Thank you. I wanted to respond to Ethan and maybe reiterate some of Eli's comments before. And I think, Ethan, your comments really get at, you know, what is the purpose of a distribution system plan in the first place? You know, is it to provide insight into utilities' long-term plans for grid modernization, let's say, or is it more than that? And I think from my point of view, it's more than that, and it's about providing transparency into utilities' planned investments to do things like enable further GHG emissions reductions, to enable DERs, et cetera. And because of that need for transparency into your planned investments, I think there is a need for a nearer term component to the plan. You know, and I don't have a strong preference as to whether that near term is 2 years or 4 years or 5 years, but I do think it's important that there is some near term piece to this, because that's where the rubber really hits the road from my point of view. Thanks.
So Samantha, you're looking for something, I guess, more than the 5-year budget that Ethan was discussing?
Oh, Your Honor, just as a quick clarification, so I think this might be helpful. What we put forward in our multi-year rate cases are 3-year plans. It's not a 5-year budget. So that 3-year plan, and again, this is not true for all utilities. Not all utilities are in multi-year rate plans or forget which acronym we drop on those letters, but MYPs or MRPs, something like that. We put forward 3-year investment plans, and those are fully provided, but it's a 3-year plan that we put forward for Delmarva Power, BG&E, and Pepco, and those are the full suite of all of the investments that we're looking at in the next 3 years. I just want to make sure that there was no confusion. ComEd is in Illinois. They do their own Illinois thing in their own Illinois regulatory context related to the formula rates that they had for the past several years.
All right. Thanks, Pearl. I appreciate the clarification. Sam, Samantha, excuse me, does that help or?
Yeah, that helps. And, sorry, and Sam is fine. Yeah, and I think I absolutely recognize that all that stuff shows up in a rate case. I think the challenge there is, rate cases are these massive dockets that a lot of interveners, ourselves included, just don't have the capacity to sort of wade through. And I think that's why it's so useful in states that have this kind of distribution system plan for us to be able to look and, to understand what the near-term plans are in one place, rather than having to wade through an entire rate case. And I recognize there will be overlap. And I'll say, based on my experience in other states, that's really common, right? In California, for example, the grid needs that are identified in utilities distribution system plans, inevitably show up in a rate case too. I think the idea is that you're consolidating things into one place for, in particular, stakeholders who want to know about the distribution system planning components of things, and again, don't have the bandwidth to wade through a whole rate case.
Okay, understood.
Thanks.
And Mr. Bartlett, I'll get you in a second. Pearl, I don't know if you know this or not, but do the Exelon utilities file something separately currently that talks about, you know, it's separate and apart from a rate case, kind of the information that Samantha's looking for, if that makes sense?
I'm going to admit that I don't know.
That's
although I
fine.
know that we put out reliability investment reports. We put out a whole variety of reports, and we do public engagement meetings where we talk through the MYPs. We do the commission overviews and all of the overviews.
Sure.
If it's a summary of that, I can go back and see like, hey, do we publish a summary? Is it all in someone's testimony? But that's something certainly follow up on, and recognize that while rate cases are the place that there is input on investment, that they are big and challenging, and by design, because that is where the dollars are put at risk and where our investment dollars are put at risk. So
Sure.
certainly recognize the challenge and the rationale for that challenge.
Right, understood. Mr. Bartlett and then Ethan.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. And thanks, this is an important discussion. Just going back to where Paul started us, and it was intrinsic in what Eli was saying as well. The relationship between the longer term plan and the 5 year, say, the short cycle planning. Ethan it seemed to me what he was describing was that then those aren't tightly connected, that the long-term plan is conceptual and and only conceptual in the sense that it doesn't really drive the 5 year thinking, because that's being driven by other considerations. And the way, having done strategic planning for programs for a long time, it seems to me that the long-term plan has to be the point that you measure your nearer term plans against to figure out whether you're on the road to where you think you should be going, even as circumstances changing. And I would just refer to in the pro formas that the Joint Utility sent, if you look at Exhibit 83, it's a curve of PEPCO's projection of BER expansion over time. And it starts to level up at around 2026, 2027, and it starts to flatten out. That probably is not, that's the way their planning is now. But when we discussed that in phase one, the answer was, why does it do that? The answer was, well, that's our capacity. And in that sense, it would be capacity limiting expansion of DERs. That's the opposite of what we need. Obviously, we need to have DERs expanding, and so capacity would have to change to accommodate that. So I'm not totally comfortable if we're really talking about the long-term plan being conceptual only and not really something against whence we measure progress in the shorter term increments.
Thank you, sir. Ethan, you've had your hand up.
Well, first, I would like to, thank you, Al, and I would hope that we would try through this process to move away from conceptual and begin talking about our long-term plans as things that we are adapting to based on the CSNA, based on state goals. That said, I'm hearing, we suggested in our JADE stage 1 comments and under the data section, and I'm hearing this here again. Samantha kind of brought it up, Al kind of brought it up. Everyone's brushing against, the term data is very broad. And as Eli's team acknowledged, utilities generate a lot of data. We generate massive amounts of data of all kinds. Some of it has legal restrictions, some of it has customer restrictions on it. I would like to move that this group, as homework for the non-utilities, come forward with what data you want and why, and specific types of data that you want to see from us as part of this process. And that will, I think, short circuit a lot of this conversation so that we can actually respond and tell people what is within the boundaries of what we can supply, what some of it's going to be critical energy infrastructure. Some of it will be customer data that is only available with the customer's permission. Some of it may be, licensing. But what we can provide, and if we can't provide that, we can also offer what we could provide instead that could still get them to that why. And I've done this exercise before in a grid modernization proceeding, and it was very helpful for everyone, because at the end of the day, we were no longer just talking about data and a black box, but talking about very specific items that people were interested in and how we could get there. And so if I could put that forward, and hopefully the stakeholders would support us clarifying what they are looking for and how we can get that, I think it would be an extremely helpful exercise.
All right. Thank you, sir. Paul and then Eli.
Yeah, I would not agree with Ethan. That is getting way, way too much into the weeds for what we're trying to accomplish here. I mean, we're talking about the general process. Does it work for Maryland? If we're talking about data and data needs, that's a whole different discussion. And actually, the other part of that discussion is, for some stakeholders, we don't even know what the data is that you have. I mean, that's a root issue, so at least for me anyway. Getting back to the 2 and 3 year investment that is being put forward in these multi-year plans, I don't view them as multi-year plans. I view them as multi-year projects. I think it's a real misnomer for what is being put forward. And I really think that, and it might be hard to do, although I think you already have it in your computers, just listing projects that are going to affect each utility that they're going to be funding needs to be put before the stakeholders, because that then will say, are you putting capacity expansions in areas that are needed for DERs? I mean, that's just one potential example. So I don't think that we have a good grasp of all the data that's out there. Asking for data that, it's the unknown unknowns that we're having a problem with, at least on the stakeholder side, or it is for me anyway. Thank
Paul,
you.
what I'm hearing though is that you want to know, for instance, what investments we're making in the capacity to support DERs. That's what I just heard, and I think that's something that we could put on the table.
I would agree with you on that statement, except that is not what this particular exercise is all about. It's looking at the 30,000 foot level. Do we have the pieces that are needed in order to do distribution system planning? I do not want to get into the weeds on data. You could spend a year on that easily, in my opinion. You do need data. I totally agree with you. And it's in the steps that we're pointing out here. But,
well, allow me to rephrase.
Okay.
Instead of data, what do you want to know about what we're doing? And, those specific kind of items would be very helpful for this discussion for us, because, we don't want this to be a black box. We do want our stakeholders to understand what we're doing and be able to interact with us on it. So, if this exercise is about data, about what you want to know, we would like to have that conversation so that we understand what it is people are looking for specifically from us, so that we can talk about how we can provide that. And right now, I'm making a note that investment in hosting capacity is one of those issues that we need to have on the table. So thank you for that, Paul.
Okay.
Well, Ethan, before you go, is it kind of what Samantha was talking about or requesting, is it possible to, for BGE, for example, to break out what they're doing, in their multi-year rate plans to accomplish the CSNA goals?
I think that would be a very easy thing for us to do.
Okay.
And, those 12 items we could definitely address. Well, it's 11 because one is the commission gets
Other.
to choose it.
Sure.
Yeah, other gets rather large fast. But, we've had these discussions before, and that was the impression I got from a lot of stakeholders, is that's what they're really interested in, less than they want to hear about, feeder ratings and such. So, that's the kind of conversation I would like to have. And I know this is me saying I'd like to, but it would help us understand what our stakeholders want out of this process. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. We got Eli, Pearl, and then Samantha.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. And thanks for this back and forth. What I actually just wanted to highlight is that I think a lot of what Ethan is teeing up here, I think could be value adding here. And I actually think, to hopefully avoid duplicative work, a lot of this has already been addressed in the first phase of the DSP proceeding. Some of these questions rang a bell to me, so I went back into my email and I looked at comments that were requested in phase 1 of the DSP work group back in, I think it was August of 2022. OPC provided comments that were responsive to a handful of the questions that are at least similar to what's being asked here. The questions were getting at what categories of information and level of detail stakeholders were keen on seeing within the distribution system planning process, what forecast information folks were interested in seeing at both the feeder and substation level, what level of data being presented would actually truly demonstrate a transparent approach, etc. So just looking back, I took a quick skim at our comments, and I think they speak to a lot of the underlying data that folks would be interested in seeing be public as part of a distribution system planning process. So I'm happy to resurface those comments if folks think that might be a helpful starting point to continue the data discussions and maybe to do so in a more targeted way. I certainly agree with the comments that there's certainly risk of getting way too in the weeds in terms of data and us spending a ton of meetings on it. And so what I might recommend is that we could potentially resurface those previous comments that we shared and then provide an opportunity for the utilities and others to react to that level of detail that we're speaking to, and for the utilities to be able to opine on how reasonable that is, and for other stakeholders to be able to give their thoughts on whether they agree that that's the right approach or a different level of data might be helpful. So again, happy to share that if that's of interest to this group.
Yeah, and I think Samantha's already on board with you on that, Eli. Yeah, she posted something in the chat. I'll get to her, get to Sam in a second. Pearl.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I recall those conversations very clearly because I think there were some strong opinions about operational level detail. And I think the phrase was reams and reams of data that we're not going to analyze from at least one key regulatory stakeholder. So I want to make sure we're not going back to phase 1 and getting into that operational detail. I don't know that folks really care about substation deficiencies and those characteristics, but I'm going to reiterate where I was earlier, which is folks are now putting live in this conversation, which is great to get the insight about what it is that they want. I think I heard from Sam, I want an accessible 3-year plan. I think we've heard some, I want to know what are the tools the utilities are investing into DER, but it is incredibly difficult for us to be able to respond on the record in this kind of forum to those positions. Even taking an informal stance is hard for us to do without being able to go back and do that kind of internal diligence about what have we done already, where are we comfortable going. Utilities are a little bit ponderous in their decision making. We need that time to be able to respond. I really ask that parties are putting information into the record. And I think the clearer that we are about what are the questions that folks are responding to, I teed up the timeline one. If it's what do you want to see at each of those timelines, that's going to help us be so much more productive. And you're going to get better engagement from the utilities. We're just not as nimble as we'd like to be in a lot of these discussions.
Thanks, Pearl. Samantha.
Oops, there we go. Thank you. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out who I'm responding to now. Maybe just I'll chime in general. I really appreciate the questions about like what it is that people want to see exactly. And exactly like Eli, I thought to myself, I feel like we've talked about this a little bit before, at least. And so I did go back to some of the previous quote unquote homework assignments that we were all assigned in the previous phase of this work group. The assignment I'm looking at is from August of 2022. And we did, discuss this a little bit. What does transparency mean to you? The questions that I posted in the chat were part of that homework assignment, quote unquote. So, and that's not to say that there aren't, maybe new stakeholder participants right now, and we, shouldn't revisit this. My point just is that, we've been talking about this, and we've talked about it before. And, I think for what it's worth, the way I would summarize what we want to see, what sort of, the larger community solar scale DER developers want to see is we want to understand what are the grid needs that the utility has identified based on, their forecast of things like electrification, DER growth, etc. And how are they planning to meet those needs? If there are capacity needs, where are they? Is there a plan to mitigate those through, upgrades or not? Or are there grid modernization plans in place that could make it easier for resources to interconnect? That's the sort of stuff that we're broadly interested in. So I just wanted to kind of add that color. Thanks.
Thank you, Samantha. Is that something that's possible from your end, Pearl? I just keep picking on you because your camera's on. I can pick on Ethan too.
You can pick us. You could pick on the other utilities too. I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah.
So we do publish that information. What I think I'm hearing is we don't like the form of that information, because all of that does go out as part of our 3-year investment plans. All of those investments are detailed. The current planning, the current way that distribution system planning is done and related to who pays for what means that we are not putting forward conceptual plans to integrate lots of devices that we don't have a way to pay for. There's a cost causer framework. We understand that the solar community is frustrated with that. We are also frustrated with that. We would like to be able to proactively invest in order to have more bidirectional power flow. We'd like to be able to proactively invest to put solar on the grid faster. We would like to be able to have some better ideas of customer adoption so that we can plan to that and put that to the commission. And I think those are some of the core issues that we should be grappling with here. So what would that 20-year look like, or 17 years or 18 years? But what is that longer term forecast? What does that look like? It's part of, to Al's point, a backcast of how do you get there. That helps you identify what are the kinds of investments that we need, what are the kinds of regulatory changes that we need. I apologize if I sound like a little bit like a broken record. We're really trying to push the progress forward because we know that this is a challenge, and we really want to work collaboratively and proactively to get to solutions. And it feels like we're still going on the turntable here a little bit.
All right. Thanks, Pearl. Got Jorge and then Al.
Yeah, so in regards to that offer of specifying what data we seek to evaluate, we will definitely take on that offer. One of the things, maybe the offer could be enhanced. If there's some data pieces that the utilities may deem to be CEII or any other kind of caveat, it will be fantastic for the utility to also articulate why these caveats are imposed on the data that that we are seeking. So we definitely take on the offer.
Appreciate that, Jorge. And you were one of the people I did this with before back in DC. So happy to dance again.
Cool. Yep.
Hey folks, and I apologize. I know I'm jumping the queue as well, but I know that all of these asks are going to put a lot of, again, we are utilities. It takes us a while to work on things internally. All of these asks are going to take a lot of time from our organizations anyone else who is going to respond. I think some of these data ones are just on us. That's all going to take a lot of time and institutional work for us to do. And I want to make sure that anything that we're doing here is in the greater push towards getting the goals that, Your Honor, you've laid out in the agenda and that the commission put forward in their process. So if we're going to be taking a 40-hour legal argument down what is CEII, I'm not sure that that's going to get us where we need to go. And I don't think my counsel would be very happy with me if I told them that was their that's what they're going to be doing on Thursdays for the next 6 months.
Yeah, no, I don't want to get into that either. So we can jump off that bridge when we get to it, but I would not envision having to do that at this work group. And if we do, I will resign because there's no way I want to have that discussion. All right, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Judge. So I think I'm sensing two different ways of looking at this planning process. One is what are you asking the stakeholders, whatever, that's a large category actually, saying the utilities, what are you planning to do? But I actually am thinking of plans in a different context. Comes from my experience in the Navy. Really, it's about navigation. The plan is where we're trying to go. That's what we said even in the 5-year phase. And there are some key outcomes that we need to be moving toward. And that's where we're all on the same team, right? And so the value of data in that sense is just like when you're navigating to go someplace, you periodically take a fix to say, am I getting there? That's the kind of information that I thought even Ethan was talking about, and that I think is most important for all of us is to know, to have plans that we look at together and believe are putting us on the pathway to where we need to go, and then monitoring progress. And that's where the indicators and the data and the things that Ethan was saying we need to define, and I think that's a good idea, become the points at which, or the means, the measurements by which we can tell, are we actually getting where we're going? And if not, what do we have to do about it? So it's really it's really a process using the plan as a map to assess whether we are on the track that we intend to be on.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, so it sounds like I know the utilities, or at least the Exelon utilities, are thinking more of keeping the 3-year plan with the multi-year rate plan than a 5, 10, and a 15-year. If I, and Pearl and Ethan, jump in if I got that incorrect. Well, I did get it incorrect because I'm just talking about BGE there. So I know Pepco and Delmarva do it a little bit differently. Although BGE currently doesn't do like a mid term plan. Is that fair to say, Ethan? It looks like you do a 1, 10, and a 15-year.
We've got the current budget, the year you're in. There's a 3-year budget and a 2-year forecast out to that. That's the basic budget. There's the 3-year MYP.
There's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah, there's a lot of different plans. Right. So it depends on what we're talking about. But as far as our budgeted plan goes, it's 5 years. As far as our load forecasting goes, it's 10 moving to 15.
All right.
And I'm sorry, folks, if this is so messy.
No, you're fine. Now, in terms of getting to what Mr. Bartlett was just discussing, where, for your budget, your 5-year budget, how often, and if so, or when is that reviewed to determine how you're progressing towards meeting the goals, or meeting whatever goals you had budgeted for or you were trying to meet?
reviews of budgets pretty much are handled on a monthly basis.
Okay.
And then there's the annual, right, this time of year is when the board of directors approves the longer term budget for the next 5 years.
Right. Mr. Bartlett, go ahead. I don't want to keep going down your train of thought if I'm doing it incorrectly.
No, that was fine. I'm just thinking, I mean, what we saw from the pro formers was that a lot of the parameters, I mean, Ethan has just been speaking about long-term load forecasting, but we're also talking about long-term generation forecasting. And those parameters, when we looked at those pro formers from the utilities, really didn't include things like DER forecasting and EV forecasting and so on, and as a systematic component of their planning process. And that's, I think, where we haven't connected yet.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, Pearl.
Thank you, Your Honor. And let me know if I'm getting this right, because I can't remember if this was in your initial comments or if it was staff, might have been MEA. So if I get folks wrong, please forgive me. What I think I'm hearing you say, Al, is we should have, and I'm not going to use the word plan because the utilities, we use plan meaning like our investment plans, and then people get all up in arms that like a conceptual plan is not a plan. But anyway, so if we did, the idea is that we should have some long-term roadmap for where it is that we want to go. And we have to start with where is it that we want to go? And maybe there's a couple scenarios about where that goes. And then it's a process of looking back to what are the investments that will need to be made in order to get us there. And those investments could be, certainly they could be capacity on the system. They could be new monitoring and control capabilities. They could be new retail programs. They could be any number of things. And you're looking for what is that roadmap to get to this endpoint, and what are those steps along the way, and are we hitting those? Did I get that in the right frame?
Brilliantly, perfectly. Yes. And that's where the word, I think, alignment that I think David Geston put in is important, so that, you know, we are aligned with, we would be looking at our alignment of those various choices that you're making, how those are aiming towards that longer term outcome, and then monitoring progress to see, is it working and what's changing that wasn't anticipated, and how do we adapt to that?
Can I assert then that in order for us to be looking at what are the step-by-step directions that we first need to, and I'm going to say again that I thought I heard alignment on this, and we've sort of circled around, that there's a need to do that longer term look at what are the tools and capabilities and what are some of the possible futures, because we all know that the future is uncertain, some possible future outcomes of what the grid could need to look like. And I'm using that term very generously to include, again, things like load flexibility programs, DERMS, all of those kinds of investments that are going to enable distributed energy resources. That I think that that's a fair thing to say, that we need to understand where we're trying to get to.
Yes, I think that's what you said earlier too, and I agree. Yes.
All right. So at least it sounds like there's some agreement on the general, I guess, process. It's just more or less a question of the timing of the plans or the horizons.
Yeah, I'm sure that if I said there was consensus that someone would disagree immediately, because that's how I know that's how that goes. Again, I think it would be really helpful for us to put it in comments, because I think that there is some agreement. I think that would help us identify where there are some mismatches.
Okay, that's fair. Tim.
Yes, thank you. And I'm, for those I'm Tim Cook. I'm with Strategen Consulting, so we're assisting OPC, and I'm helping out Eli as well. The only point I wanted to add here, I think I agree with a lot of what Pearl has said. On the kind of mid-year planning, we recommend like a 6 or 5 year. I think our I think our point in the mid-year is that being able to look at what the investments are immediately, but then also, so like for a utility that has an MRP, looking at the investments that are being made in this MRP, and then also what the kind of intended investments are going to be in the next MRP, and making sure the current investments support what's going to happen in the next MRP, because all of these grid mod investments are really iterative. They build on each other. You need forecasting to move on to, interconnection changes and things like that. And so making sure that what we're investing in today supports the investments that need to be made in 3 or 5 years. And that's kind of our intention with the midterm, and making sure that the time frame is right, that we can capture both of those kind of like investment timelines.
All right. Does that make sense, Pearl? Kinda.
I think I understand the rationale. I'm not sure, and we'd have to talk internally about it, but I
understood
that. So I'll just say the subject to check, and then we'll sort of move on. That there's enough uncertainty between 6 and 10 with some of the way that the forecast moves, that I'm not sure how much additional value you get from that midterm, and certainly sort of a 2-year look ahead MRP. I don't know that we could get to that same level of detail, but I'm just not sure that based on the way that loads move, and someone says they're going to build an apartment building, it goes into year 7, or maybe it goes into year 6 of the forecast. By the time you get to year 2, they've delayed it for 3 years, so now it's in year 9. I'm not sure that there's enough certainty in, say, year 6 or 7 that you're going to get very much additional value on that time horizon relative to the 10-year.
All right. And Pearl, you don't have to say subject to check. We're not going to hold you to anything you say. If you need to change your opinion, that's fine. I don't want you to feel, I know I keep, I don't want to say picking on you, but calling on you, but I don't want you to feel like you're being cross-examined. And if that's how, I apologize in advance if that's how it's coming across, but there's not really a record. We're just trying to have a conversation. So
I'm recognizing my own limitations, Your Honor.
It's okay. Well, I didn't do that all the time. All right. We've got H. Regal and then DeAndre. All right, DeAndre. Or if
yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay. I think the conversation starts with year 2031. According to the CSNA, there's a 60% reduction in GHG emissions that's expected, or the goal. That's within the next 5 or so years. So I think the plan, whatever long-term, short-term, everyone's capable of creating a plan in the next 5 years, or have an understanding as to how close they can get to a 60% reduction in GHG emissions. From there, how do you get to net zero by 2045? And that's the plan. I don't think we should lose focus as to what the goals are. I mean, that's why we're here. We're trying to align distribution system planning with the policy goals, and those are the goals. So I think I think we kind of, the discussion is kind of all over the place, but yeah, I think that's the foundation of what it is we're discussing here, and what these plans or ideas that utilities are having as to where their systems, the capability of their systems, and what their plans are in the future will center around.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, I'm not H. Regal.
Judge, can you hear me now?
We can. We got you.
Okay, my apologies. I've been pulled in several different directions this morning, so I've been in and out here this morning.
No problem.
Herb Riegel for Southern Maryland Electric. I would just share, I don't want to lose sight that SMECO is a nonprofit cooperative organization. And we have a long history of basically following RUS, the Rural Utility Service guidelines when it comes to developing our capital plans and how we go through our processes. So they may be a little bit different from other utilities. SMECO typically does what we call a 3-year construction work plan. That's our 3-year capital improvement plan. And we follow with a 12-year electric system plan. And we select 12 years because it marries up very nice with our 3-year construction work plan cycles. So we can move from one construction work plan into another cycle following the guidelines and the recommendations that were already established in the electric system plan. The 20-year forecast that I think DeAndre had brought up earlier, those are broad system load forecasts. They're not typically used in our capital improvement plans. They're basically looking at what is the load and energy and so forth out on our system 20 years into the future. We got away from doing 20-year capital improvement plans quite some time ago, basically because things change. By the time you get to year 10 of that plan, a lot of things have changed and diverged from where we originally thought we were going to go. And we find that there wasn't as much value in what was set out in a longer 20-year horizon. So we'd be more apt to stick to a 3-year short plan. And we prefer to stick with our 12-year mid-range plan because it marries well with our cooperative resources and how we do business. And I guess another thing I would throw out there is, SMECO's system is pretty robust. And we find out within our 3-year work plan and 12-year system plan that a lot of the capital improvement jobs we do are geared towards things like operational reliability and deteriorated facilities and overhead to underground conversion type projects. We haven't found here in recent years a whole lot of capital improvement projects dedicated strictly to capacity needs. And it sounds like a lot of the conversation that's happening within the system planning work group seems to be geared at or looking at increasing capacity on the systems, and that may not necessarily be the case so much with SMECO. And I think those are just some important things to bring out how the cooperative may be a little bit different than what other utilities are doing and how we may work with the system planning process. So thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, sir. Now, do your plans, your 3-year and 12-year plans, do you anticipate including, how SMECO is going to meet the goals set forth in 7802 and the Capital or Climate Solutions Now Act, sir?
Yeah, we do. We always keep them in consideration when we go through a lot of our plans. But I guess what I throw out there again is SMECO is a smaller nonprofit cooperative. There's only so many limited funds and manpower available to push forth certain efforts. And it's deteriorated facilities take into account a lot of those funds. There's only so much extra capital to look to enhance those goals. We always look at alternatives in each of our plans, and it always seems that there are just it's not just capacity driving a given project. There's usually other needs driving those projects, but we always keep all 11 of those initiatives in our mind and do look towards alternatives means. A matter of fact, we have a unique project going on right now, Judge. That's an island that's located about 1,200, 1,300 feet from the mainland. And we're going out Monday to look at a non-wire solution to possibly get rid of the hard line to the land, to the island, and replace it with distributed energy resource, standalone off-grid type system. So when those opportunities arise, we certainly take a look at them and try to promote those where we can.
All right. All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right. All right. Have we done time horizons? Have we beat that horse to death for right now? All right. And Pearl, you and it seemed like folks agreed with it, you were hoping to see some comments on what exactly folks are looking for, or you stated it better than I can recall.
Yeah, Your Honor, I think that it was, what are the time horizons, and then what are the time horizons for study, sort of why those time horizons, and what are folks looking at in a succinct way at those different time horizons.
Yeah, Eric.
Thank you. Getting confused where the mute button is. So many different systems I'm in. Yes. So just wanted to follow up on a comment earlier in regards to what are the utilities doing to make sure that there's more, say, PV on the system and things of that nature. I think and I think we all understand it, but we just don't say it, right? That the utility systems are enablers, right? We enable different technology, different load, different resources on the system, but it's not the utility that says a house can have PV or not, right? Just to give you some numbers, right now there are over 55,000 PV applications that has come to BG, and of those, 99.95% of them have been approved. So it's not like the infrastructure is not enabling us to add renewables to the system. I think it is just as important as we are having this conversation and saying what is the utility doing to enable and us achieving the Maryland goals. There needs to be information on the other side too, right? In regards to what are the developers or the DER developers, the PVs, what is being proposed, where are those coming from, to help the utilities include that information into their planning process. I know there's a queue that is used for interconnections, right? But is there any additional information that would be shared? It's not just the utilities solving this. We're all stakeholders looking to achieve the same goal. So just wanted to share that there are certain things we speak to as if it's the utilities' responsibility to make sure that we achieve the amount of renewables on the system, but it's a collective responsibility within the state of Maryland.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Bartlett.
Yes, thank you, Josh. Yeah, I just want to appreciate the point that Eric's making, and I think that this is where the concept of stakeholder involvement becomes important, because obviously the utilities themselves, they are generators, and so the PV and the EVs and that are going to be bidirectionally taking and putting charge onto the system and so on, that's in the hands of other people, and that's where the transparent stakeholder participation process becomes critical, because it is a discussion. And I think it's important to make the point that there are levels of stakeholders. There are individual consumers like those homeowners, and frankly, there are places where the system has reached capacity and homeowners are not able to add additional solar on their particular home because there are capacity limitations. And so that's one dimension to it. But there are also the folks, the developers, who are looking at the bigger picture and saying, well, we really are hitting limitations, or we do not have adequate hosting capacity, or there are needs or areas that we need to be working. And that input then complements the utilities processes and should be part of the utility. I think that's what we're saying. We say transparent stakeholder participation. So it's not just in looking over the shoulders of the utilities, but actually providing the input so that we're not just talking about load forecasting, we're talking about generation forecasting.
All All right, thank you, sir. All right, anybody else want to be heard before we move on to the second bullet? All right.
This
Yes.
is Paul Berchinsky. I
Yes,
just
sir.
want to make one comment.
You're
I
fine.
think we're all in agreement that we need time horizons. We can differ on the how long we want to go, but it is a key portion of this roadmap that needs to be addressed. And I think that that's the important outcome of this discussion. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and when I say we're moving on, it's just for today because I envision coming back to it in a couple weeks. Yeah, so I'm not meaning to dismiss it at all. I do agree that there needs to be time horizons, and I think if we can provide some more feedback to the utilities, hopefully they can of exactly what folks are looking for and when they're looking for it. Hopefully we'll be able to reach or get a little bit closer to a consensus. All right. Before we move on, does anybody from Potomac Edison here or want to weigh in on anything?
Yeah, this is Dave Bedard. Let me turn my camera on. So I would like to agree with what DeAndre said earlier that I think it'd be best to focus on the commission, the goals that we're set forth in the work group. One other thing that's kind of been going through my mind throughout this discussion, I wanted to bring up. Potomac Edison serves 2 states. Potomac Edison is just one utility part under the First Energy umbrella. We're one of 10 operating companies. We merged with First Energy 2011-ish. And throughout the merger agreement there was synergy savings identified, and those costs were returned to the customers. Throughout that merger agreement, those synergy savings were outlined. Our customers enjoy the rates that they enjoy because we're part of a larger group and we have commonalities in systems, many different computer systems. Distribution planning is one of them. So I'm not saying we can't be different. You can't have comply with Maryland rules and laws, but that's just something that can't be overlooked, that our customers depend on us enjoying the savings from synergies with other operating companies in a lot of these systems, and distribution planning is one of them.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. All right. Next bullet is, and we kind of touched on this a little bit already, the levels of granularity for analysis. And Pearl, I know you disappeared, but is this kind of also what you're looking for in terms of from the stakeholders, in terms of what exactly they're looking for to make your lives better or make your ability to respond easier?
Yeah, I think that would be phenomenal, because it sounds like from a utility perspective, we put out copious amounts of data. It sounds like that's not meeting the needs for folks in terms of the way to digest that. And so saying we're looking for a high level overview, we're looking for a list of potential programs. I think that's really helpful, and absolutely then we can respond with, here's the kind of modeling from an engineering perspective that makes sense at different timelines. Here's what you're going to be able to get out of this modeling realistically versus what you're not going to be able to get out. And we can maybe provide some cross references to other places that think about it in the same way.
Okay. And I know Mr. Rachinsky has his hand up, but he had a list of several items that he was interested in. I don't know if you had an opportunity to review those. And it starts with KV circuits age and expected replacement.
I don't have the list in front of me. I'd put that on the list of things that we would respond to and trying to keep track of that granularity.
Understood. Mr. Berchinsky, I don't mean to steal your thunder.
No, I appreciate the comment, Judge. The list that I put together is based on my very limited experience in working groups of what I saw as granularity that particularly the utilities were interested in, both short-term and long-term. I don't think it's a comprehensive list by any means, but I threw it out there for discussion because this to me is one item that is needed for projections. So, you know, again, it gets down to how much down into the weeds do we want to get on each one of the items? Or can we agree that we do need levels of granularity for different projections that are being made? You know, the what I would refer to as the project level projections, the next 1 to 3 years. What do we need for granularity if you're going out 10 years? To what extent do you need granularity when you go out 20 years? I mean, that can be a very extensive discussion, but again, like time horizons, I would agree you're going to need different levels of granularity, and I think everybody would agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Samantha.
Thank you. I'm looking at our comments here. So I think this to me seems like a straightforward, maybe straightforward isn't the right word, but it's a singular question about what's the level of granularity for analysis, which kind of begs the question, well, what are we analyzing? So what I would say is we're looking at forecasts of DER growth, et cetera, and we're looking at grid needs. And then the question is, well, at what level on the system are we doing that? Thinking about how I've seen this done in other states, it's usually done at the feeder level. So I guess the short answer is some kind of feeder level analysis of DER forecasts and grid needs is common practice. And I think it's another question as to like how much of that analysis is publicly available. You know, are utilities required to publish, for example, their feeder level DER forecast? I don't have a strong opinion on that question. I and again, I don't want to open this can of worms, but I feel like that's kind of the next question that comes to mind is, well, do we make this public? But I would just point out that in a number of other states, those forecasts are published. There usually is an attachment to the distribution system plan. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Samantha. I'm sure we'll get to the publishing at some point. Yes, DeAndre.
Yes. I think, well, first off, overall, the commission would like to see more stakeholder engagement between the utilities and the stakeholders. So this particular block, I think, can definitely be one that garners a lot of that engagement. For one, as pointed out by the Exelon utilities, I believe in their comments, they've gained a lot of foresight in regards to their planning process by engaging with their stakeholders a little bit more, increasing their engagement with their stakeholders. But I think there will be, overall, I think there could be differences between what the commission may wish, the granularity of the data that the commission may want published, and the amount of the level of granularity that the utilities share with the stakeholders in order to see or get the input that they need in order to have more accurate forecasts. So I think that's where we are. I think that's what the overall idea is that I think will be a successful, beneficial to both utilities and stakeholders. So I think that's the dividing line. What will be published? What will be shared with what the stakeholders need from the utilities in order to be to participate and or develop DER projects that meet some of those needs.
So what's staff looking for? I mean, in terms of what kind of analysis do you want to see from the utilities?
I think that's something that we will probably need to iron out a little bit better on our behalf. But overall, just an overall oversight. There's what will be provided to the stakeholders may be different than what we may ultimately require in the end.
Okay.
Mr. Verchinsky's comments, they definitely are. We feel that they are exhaustive. We may not necessarily want to see all of the suggested levels of granularity that he has provided, but I think it is definitely it's good for a start in regards to a conversation that we need to all have.
All right. Ethan, do you have any thoughts or comments on the list Mr. Verchinsky provided? Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second, Ethan. Tim, I'm sorry, I skipped you, sir.
All right, I'm happy to let Ethan go first as well if he is burning to reply. But I was going to kind of follow on just about Strategen's interpretation of this and the data that's needed and the granularity. I mean, I think to a lot of people's points, there's kind of two questions here. It's the question of what are utilities using for their planning, and then also how is it being shared with stakeholders. I think to the first point, I believe that the granularity that utilities are using, I think we're kind of on the same path of, there's an understanding amongst utilities that we're getting, more granular data, hourly data at the feeder level, et cetera. I think our more emphasized point here is more data access by stakeholders. I think it's not that, I think to Al's point, that stakeholders aren't trying to just look over the shoulder of utilities in this process. Integrated distribution system planning is much more about integrating stakeholders into the process of distribution system planning, and that requires better data access. Our main point here being that we think that it makes sense to have centralized data like platforms, like a process by which you get data, so that data is provided in consistent formats and in a single location with a specific process to get data, rather than it being kind of piecemeal of like, I want this data, so I go to this person. I want that data, I go to this person, and getting it in various formats. Just like sometimes it's in a PDF, sometimes it's in an Excel document. So that's a lot of the idea behind getting a data platform. To the more gritty detail of what needs to be in this, I think it. I mean, I can't give you a comprehensive list of what data we need, but I can say that it needs to be comprehensive enough data that stakeholders are a part of this process, that they can have enough visibility to make useful recommendations on needed investments in the system. A lot of that is these, like forecasts, I believe someone else has already mentioned, but also understanding system topology and architecture. We recognize that some of this stuff is sensitive. I think that a data platform needs to have security measures to make sure that you can provide access to people who have been granted access, but also restrict it from those who don't. But being able for stakeholders to to be a part of the actual investment planning process and truly understand the investments that are being made, why they're being made, and the costs and benefits of them. It requires like very in-depth knowledge of both the system and the investments being made.
Hi, am I up, Chuck?
Certainly. Go ahead, jump in, Ethan.
First, to Paul's list, just looking it over, we would like, more discussion of why it is needed, and the same with OPC's proposal. I'm going to say straight up, we've not had time to really review OPC's proposal very well, but the data platform and the level of access that they are looking for this open, that brings up all kinds of cyber and legal red flags for us. And, we're going to have to take some time to really process that. Would ask OPC if they want to have this level of, Tim mentioned, influence over our investments. And the commission and orders were very clear that we bear the risk and responsibility for our investments. I would like to hear from OPC what risk they're willing to put on the table if they want to take responsibility for our investment decisions. What are they going to bring to the game? Are they going to create a reg asset whereby we get paid for if we take one of their recommendations and it turns out to not pan out? Are they going to take some kind of regulatory risk where we will get paid for that? I don't know how such a model would work. So I'm very curious how they intend, how this seems to conflict with the commission's pretty clear statements about the risk and responsibility. We are going to bring forward a proposal soon, and apologies it didn't get done today, but we're having discussions with a larger group of people now for areas where stakeholders can access and bring us feedback for incorporation into our planning. I think that we've got a more of a people-based version than a cyber platform. And again, that's going to raise a lot of flags with our cyber and legal teams. So, we're going to have to take some time to discuss that internally. But most of all, we want to know the why and what risk other groups would be willing to take on if they were to take on additional influence over our investments.
Right. I'm going to go out on a limb on the second point on the level of risk. I'm going to say none. I don't know how the commission would approve something like that, but my guess is they're not going to approve that, and I'm sure no party is going to want to take on that risk either. Maybe influence was the wrong word. Maybe I think maybe input, participation in the plans and if a recommendation wasn't accepted, why, I think is probably what most stakeholders are looking for. Eli.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, to reply to that, what Tim is intending to say is not that OPC would like to replace the utility role in distribution system planning. I don't think that's what he said at all. And I think what we're trying to clarify is that the utilities should, of course, maintain their role as maintaining the reliability and the safety of the distribution grid. No pushback there. What we're trying to get at is that there needs to be an opportunity for stakeholders to be materially and meaningfully involved within this process, and for there to be opportunities for stakeholders to offer feedback and for utilities to either incorporate that feedback or discuss why it would be imprudent to incorporate that feedback. So there's no, overstepping of the bounds here. There's no looking to replace what the utilities do. That is in no way what our comments intend. Instead, we're really just looking for essentially a seat at the table to be able to have access to the right data, to be able to understand whether the utility decision-making processes and alternatives considered are reasonable, not to make them ourselves, but to be able to understand the reasonableness of this. I'll just briefly add in on this concept around a data platform, certainly understand that there's always concern over CEII getting out. We in no way would envision a data platform allowing that to happen. In fact, there are a number of jurisdictions across the US that are currently working towards deploying a data platform as such. And of course, all of those regulators have processes to ensure that all cybersecurity and confidentiality related concerns are being mitigated. So if Maryland were to go down this route of developing a data platform, of course, we can look to other states who have done this exact thing or are in the process of doing this exact thing, understand what their concerns are, their approaches to mitigating issues around confidentiality and CEII, because all utilities maintain very similar, maybe not exactly the same, CEII, and therefore processes in one state should provide a lot of lessons learned to other states, which we recommend that Maryland consider. All in all, I just want to reiterate that OPC's stance is not that the utilities should no longer be the distribution planners. I don't think that's something we've said. Instead, we're just trying to carve out a role that ensures that stakeholders are able to truly play a role within distribution system planning, provide a feedback, be heard, and have that feedback incorporated in some particular manner. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, sir. Jorge, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, so
Appreciate the clarification, Eli. Sorry, Jorge.
No, go ahead, man.
I get those.
Yeah, it's really quick. I'm going to tag along. Listen, we hear you. Absolutely. Listen, guys, the utilities have the ultimate responsibility to ensure the safe and reliable operation of the grid. What we want is to be able to knowledgeably, to have the knowledge, to provide with the data, with pertinent data, to be able to provide feedback for discussions of alternatives. Listen, you'll have licensed engineers. You can come up with a safe and reliable solution. What we're trying to determine is the level of safeness and reliability that you are seeking on your solutions to be able to gauge if another safe and reliable solution may be considered. And without having pertinent data, it's going to be difficult to provide feedback that will be that will have the pertinent knowledge to be able to be considered.
All right, thank you, sir. Pearl, you want to say how much you love the platform idea?
I love a good gaming platform. Steam is the one that we use in our house. We don't store any CEII on it though. No, I was just going to reflect that these opportunities exist. They are in a rate case. We get thousands of DRs, and I recognize that there's a different kind of insight and analysis that some of the parties are looking for. And I apologize if I use like rate case like terms, because this to me sounds just like the same argument that we have in a rate case every time. And I don't think that having these conversations about the evaluation of safe and reliable alternatives in our operational investment plans are really what we're talking about when we're talking about how are we going to get to the ambitious climate goals that the state of Maryland has. And I recognize the 2031 deadline, but it goes well beyond that. We have renewable portfolio standards. We have community solar programs. We have clean cars rule. We have all of this transportation electrification. And I'm really struggling with what feels like a rate case conversation and the level of data that OPC has access to outside of a rate case when there's all of that information in a rate case. I'd really rather focus this working group not on that procedural piece and on those longer term goals.
Well, isn't it, by the time it gets to a rate case, isn't it too late to suggest solutions for the utility to implement? Or alternatives, I should say. Right? Yes. It's more or less like, we don't like that idea, just don't do it.
So no, and I think the Office of People's Counsel has significant experience going through the alternatives analysis that we do provide. We do a 3-year look ahead as part of our MYP, and there are investments that have been changed or not put into plans going forward. I think if we're talking about hey, we'd like to look at the longer term strategic view and how do we get there, then yes, like let's have that conversation. Should we have, what are the kinds of tools that are needed? Let's talk about those. Let's bring in the stakeholder input, which I think we heard from Al, which I really appreciated, and from Eric, of like, look, customers are going to adopt these different technologies. Folks are going to electrify their fleets. We need that information to be able to plan. Let's bring in all of that stakeholder information so that we can get to where it is that we're all trying to go.
Right, but like with your alternatives analysis that you would see in a case, that's not necessarily saying something that OPC would have considered. I think from what I understand, what the stakeholders want, and I think what the commission wants, is for stakeholders to have a seat at the table and or involved in the process when the utilities are developing their plans, and that OPC or staff or Mr. Bartlett or Mr. Verchinsky, for example, could say, hey, rather than, I don't know, build this coal plant, you should maybe build a solar farm instead. And that's obviously not a good example, but something to that, in that vein.
But I think that's actually a really good example, Your Honor, because it's illustrative of like what is the right kind of input. Do folks really want to have a conversation about, should we address this specific voltage issue with a cap bank or with a different kind of transformer? Do we want to adjust the tap, or do we want to do something different? Like, I don't see that as helpful for getting us to the goals. I see really helpful as getting to the goals things like, are we doing EV managed charging programs? Do we have the ability to manage that load flexibility? Are we building out proactively to enable solar developers to interconnect? Are we proactively building out to allow fleet? Are we doing those in the right areas? Do we have the right information? Do we have the right buy-in? And I think that those are two very different kinds of questions. I think the latter is absolutely where we need stakeholders to be leaning in and helping us figure out that path. I just don't see the value of talking about the cap bank.
All right, thank you. All right, a couple hands up. We got Mr. Bartlett, DeAndre, and then Jorge.
Yes, I think I really want to agree with what Earl just said. I don't think that when we talk, I want to go back to the role of stakeholders, basically, where I'm not sure that it's so necessary that we know about circuit bypasses for overload, but what is really important, and some good examples were offered in the input for this session, for example, where the utilities, and I think DeAndre mentioned some of this, but the utilities worked with consumers to do thinking about how much EV adoption are we likely to see in the next few years? How many people are actually seriously thinking about storage with the incentives that are out there, or things like that? There's also the industry where certain areas where community solar projects might be developed, but the hosting capacity is limited. We should be looking at those areas. Because sites are limited for community solar, and so we should be thinking together about how are we going to meet that expansion. And actually, the Brandon Shores or the coal-fired power plant thing is not a bad example, because if we'd done some thinking maybe 5 or 6 years ago about what was going to happen when Brandon Shores closed, we wouldn't be talking about having to build new transmission capacity, because we might have actually developed the renewable energy in that area that would have helped us shore up that that area of the distribution system. So the point being that identification of need, it's true, the utilities can do projections, but their projections are going to be enhanced through the stakeholder participation process, and that's the way I'm coming to it, as in that positive respect, rather than the looking over the shoulder aspect.
Understood. Thank you, sir. DeAndre.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. McLean, for being a leader in this position. I mean, it's different than what we've seen in phase one.
You'll be cursing me later, I'm sure.
No, no, no. I mean, it's definitely night and day between what we've seen happen in the first phase and what's going on in this phase. So first, I want to commend you for that. And I know it's
Thank you.
frustrating
That
hearing
sounds
a
like
little
low
bit
bar.
from everybody. I know it's frustrating hearing everybody's, input here and there and trying to kind of, bring everybody to consensus. So I just want to start off with that. But to kind of clarify and bring a little bit more shape to what it is that your question in regards to what staff wants to see. Ultimately, we want to see a product from the utilities that consists of a DSP plan that they are confident with, that has included the input from the stakeholders, and our feedback in regards to that plan will be hatched out in a hearing of some sort, where we'll have the opportunity to see what they presented and provide our feedback. I think this process is not just going to be it's a growing process. What we may ask of today won't necessarily be what we'll ask of or require tomorrow. And I think it starts with the utilities presenting us with a plan that involves that has a robust input from from stakeholders, and we want to see how that ties into their plan and those clean energy goals that the state has set. So the ultimate DSP plan should include or connect all of that. What in regards to we've proposed that, and based on what we've picked up from the RAP report and what we've seen done in other states, is that the utilities and stakeholders get together and determine what that looks like, or what that platform or that engagement looks like. That could be advisory groups that consist of stakeholders throughout their service territories, or whatever the case may be, websites, whatever tools that they feel are necessary in order to get robust stakeholder feedback, to then take that feedback and include it in their DSP plans based on their own plans, the capabilities of their various systems, and how they plan on using all of that data to reach or to attain the clean energy goals. So we don't want to, staff is not necessarily looking to tell the utilities or direct them as to how their engagement with the stakeholders are. I think that's something that stakeholders and utilities can kind of figure out. But we want to make sure that both parties come to a consensus to what that looks like, and which results in a product that we can then all kind of give input at future hearings or whatever manner in which we decide that how that should proceed.
All right, thank you, sir. Jorge.
Yeah, and in order to be able to provide educated input to that stakeholder process, the pertinent data needs to be made available. We can, yes, we have been able, we have been engaged in certain proceedings where the utility provides some results that results from modeling. And for example, if a utility identifies a restricted transformer because he have reached his thermal limit, has reached the thermal capabilities, because this modeling says so, we like to know why does that specific transformer has limitations, and to the extent of the limitations, then engineering assumptions that were involved in regards to those thermal limitations, the time frame where that limitation was identified. So an alternative could be discussed. But right now, it appears that the utility provides significant amount of information that is predicated in things that we still do not understand. And that output dictates some of the solutions that they're presenting. So it's about being able to provide educated input. So alternatives could be evaluated before you go into the engineering design, right? This is all conceptual. So, we need to catch it before, at the right time, before it goes through the process.
All right, thank you, sir. Tim.
Just to add to that, I think I mean, to part of Pearl's point was that, you know, every load tap change, it probably doesn't, it's not a value add maybe to have stakeholder involvement with it. But I think I think most of the utilities now have some kind of criteria in place for formally requiring alternatives to be considered. It might be like an X million dollar, you know, like $3 million projects and above have to have a formal consideration of an alternative to the project. And I think if, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to follow that framework, but I think if a project is deemed to be significant enough that, you know, it requires additional alternative analysis, potentially this is a project that also is worth having stakeholder involvement in the alternative development as Jorge's talking about.
All right, thanks, Tim. Eric.
Yes, thank you. Just, you know, just listening to the stakeholders and from the utility perspective, just want to make sure we're aligned here. What I'm hearing then is the stakeholders are looking for identified constraints on the system, not wanting to know what our forecast is for every single feeder, right? That's not what I'm hearing, but some of the stakeholders are saying they want all of the data from a feeder perspective. But the more I listen, I'm hearing that most of the stakeholders are asking for, where are the constraints on the system? And can we get some more information about those constraints and timely information? With that in mind, also, I think it's important for us to put some boundaries around what constraints or what projects would not be included in this conversation from a DSP perspective. Let me see if I can provide some clarity on that. If the utility has a project that is already in flight, right? So we're building a new substation. The substation is in flight, right? It has gone through. Let's think, and we've set up the process, and it's gone through all of that, you know, the different stakeholders and conversations already. So that if it's already in flight, we shouldn't be taking that into discussions within the DSP process. We have to put some boundaries around things that are not included in the stakeholder engagement aspects from a solutioning perspective.
Sir, when you say in flight, you mean like under construction or already in the planning phases, or?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, but okay, so assuming it went through a stakeholder process, you wouldn't want to revisit that. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, sir.
Thank you very much, Judge McLean. Right. So I think, you know, when I looked at the JADE roadmap, right, the first box I saw that we kind of jumped over it was develop guidance or rules for the whole process, right? And I think that is something that we should sort of say, you know, we shouldn't be reopening things that we already discussed and is in flight. With that in mind, right? So there's a window we're looking at that is further out. And to Mr. DeAndre Wilson's comments, right, is as we look further out, the state goals should be included into whatever our forecast is as much as possible to identify where constraints are expected on the system. And this is a risky business we're in here, right? Because no one really knows what customer behaviors are going to be like, right? Whether we're going to buy 1 or 2 EVs in a home or what, we don't know. We still haven't flushed out the building electrification stuff, right? We haven't flushed out storage. There's so many things that Mr. Wilson I think is speaking to that we need to include into our forecast in some way, shape, or form, so that we can somewhat identify where there's some constraints on the system or potential constraints going to be on the system, right? So there's some risk there that we have to take, and we're going to have some conversations around those and include the stakeholders in those. Is that what I'm hearing, right? Coming from, especially when I listen to the OPC team. I think when I listen to Mr. Bartlett, I'm hearing that also. Just want to check.
All right.
And really quick, just to respond to that, when you're saying, and this is our story, and Eric, maybe you can give me a little bit of perspective. But when you're saying that these projects are already on the pipeline, they're being constructed, so are you saying that this project already had some kind of blessing by the PSC, got some kind of approval, got a needs determination? Was there some opportunity to review what was presented?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Right. Let's think about this for a minute, right? We all, and I'm gonna speak a little bit selfishly, so bear with me, right? From a BG perspective, we're in the MYP period right now, right? We just went through a lot of DERs and feedback and things of that nature, and we proposed our projects, right? Once the decision has been made by the PSC, what we should move forward with, right? Whatever we have in the plan for the MYP period, right, shouldn't be a discussion in any other windows that we're talking about the DSP plan, right? Because that is locked, right? And if there was any project, right? So give you an example, a substation takes around, say, and I'll put in quotations, around 5 years to build, right? We started building the substation in year one of the MYP. We're having discussions. We're having discussions through DSP, right? The fact that the substation is going to go in year 5, that shouldn't be on the table for discussion. We've already gone through that. So the window we're looking at is past MYP. Right.
Gotcha. I thought my understanding, and maybe we can rehash this later, but I thought my understanding was that there's some kind of a gap, because it appears that on some of the activities being proposed on the MRP, I don't remember what utility was in Maryland. Some of the activities being presented, when we're seeking, when was this approved? When was a needs determination made? I don't think there was any, but we may want to look into this again, and it may be the fact that you got an approval from the PSC and you move forward. But I thought that there was a gap in some of those proceedings where some activities were moving forward without a need determination or approval from the PSC.
I'll give you an example. In our MYP2, we had a substation in MYP2 that was in flight. We've spent X amount of money on that substation already. That was approved in MYP1. And in MYP2, one of the recommendations that came about is that we should scratch that substation. Right? So just trying for us to identify the boundaries, right? Because there has to be boundaries that we are talking about. Thank you. Right? And as we're talking about DSP and to bring it back to Mr. Wilson, right? It's about how we achieve the Maryland goals. Because I'm not sure if you all are feeling the same concerns that we are at the utility here. These are very aggressive goals, and there's a lot of work that we need to do together to get there. And that's the conversation I want to have. I'll pause. Thank you very much, Judge McLean.
Sure. Yeah. On your substation, if you get commission approval, I don't know that necessarily, we should be talking about it like in terms of this work group and, how your plans are reviewed moving forward. But, having it challenged in a rate case is something completely different.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Thank
Mr. Berchinsky.
Thank you, Judge. I'm frankly very pleased at the robust discussion on these items. And it's frankly pointed up that there's granularity needs. They're different for the utilities. They're different probably for different stakeholders. You're not going to have a one size fits all for all the stakeholders. One of the things that I want to get away from is, we seem to be talking about solutions here when the discussion should be, what's the granularity that's needed? It's different for different stakeholders, including the utilities. And I think everybody recognizes that. One of the things as a stakeholder, which is going to be a real big problem, you want stakeholders involved, but if the information is not presented in a manner that is understandable to a stakeholder, then it's going to go for naught. I mean, I looked at one that to me is very understandable that's done in New Jersey. And again, this is getting to solutions, which I really don't think should be part of this discussion. They use an ABC method for identifying feeders that can have more DERs on them. A, no problem. Whatever you want to put on, it's there. B, well, we do have some constraints. You need to talk with us, but it should be manageable. And then C, we're up to capacity and then some. So, I mean, your stakeholders, if you want to get us involved, and I'm an outlier, and I'll admit that I'm an engineer, I get into details. But the vast majority of folks, particularly folks that are customers that are not part of a group, have an extreme problem with understanding when they go to like BGE to put a rooftop solar on and they're told you can't put it on. And if you put it on, you got to upgrade our transformer. You got to upgrade our feeder. And as somebody who's knowledgeable in that area, if I ask for a non-wire solution, it's not considered. So, that's kind of my input on this. I like the discussion, but it means different things to different people. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody want to respond or weigh in?
Hi, Ethan here. First, just wanted to point out that discussions of how to expand hosting capacity are happening in the interconnection work group, and this is probably a good time to propose that we bring in their latest report, which has various proposals for increasing hosting capacity, for allocation of costs, to avoid the problem that Paul mentioned.
And they will be joining us at some point in time. Not
Great.
sure. I think I've got them maybe a little bit later in the process, but I was looking at like block 5 and 6 for them. But go ahead, Ethan. I'm sorry, sir.
No, not at all. But also, as far as right now, and I really like where Paul went there, non-wire solutions to support solar. That is something that we want to explore and want to be able to do. And, that if this group wanted to come forward with some proposals about how utilities can employ non-wire solutions to support customer interconnection, that would be some interesting ground to cover. So if I would be interested to hear from other parties what they think of that.
All right. Thank you, sir. Samarit.
Thank you, Your Honor, for a robust discussion. I just wanted to reiterate what we said in phase 1 of the report in terms of the level of granular information we would need. I think Eli and Samantha mentioned the August 22 comment, and we'd be happy to recirculate those again. But we said we were not particularly interested in detailed feeder level forecast information unless, the forecast ended up showing a significant change from previous years and resulted in material changes in capital plans. So those we said we were not as interested in. What we were interested in, however, was any annual report. I think the context of the question was, what should an annual DSP report, what should it include? So we asked that report should include the use of non-wire solutions and any criteria that would be used, what kind of projects would trigger non-wire solutions. We provided as an example a $5 million project or above should be something that would trigger a non-wire solution as a consideration at least. So also, what are the use of technologies and processes to support DSP improvements? Eric earlier mentioned that utilities are enablers, and we acknowledge that, and we would like to see what are DRs interconnected as a result of the new distribution system planning process. So those are, kind of things we would be interested in seeing in a distribution system plan report, even at penetration as a result of the new process, energy efficiency and load flexibility impacts on peak load reduction and per capita energy consumption. So those are, the type of things we were interested in. DSP projects that improve reliability and resilience, expansion of hosting capacity. I think these are discussed, but we were not as interested in feeder level granular data in the annual reports. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. All right. Yes, Thad.
Thanks, Judge McLean. Just wanted to echo what Ethan was just saying, that we're very interested in having that conversation. We've been having it in the interconnection working group in terms of finding flexible interconnection and other practices to avoid upgrades. So yeah, count me in on that.
All right. Yeah. As I said, they're going to be joining us probably at a later date, as well as storage. Looks like the BCA working group. So we got 6 or 7 working groups that are going to be involved at some point in time. All right. Anybody else want to be heard on this? All right. It's 20 of 1. Do folks want to take a lunch break, or do we want to keep pressing on?
I could really use food.
All right. Why don't we take a half hour and we'll come back at 10 after 1.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.